Hey everybody, this is Jennifer Hilt, and I wanted to talk to you guys today about Ken in the Barbie movie and all the awesome tropes that makes his story work. As we know, he's just Ken and his job is beach. Actually, that's his whole identity, which provides a really great conflict for how we get this awesome movie started. So, we're going to talk about what are some of the conflicts driving Ken and the way that tropes are used to do that, because this is really a movie that's completely filled by tropes, but in a really great way by taking the tropes and twisting them a little bit. So it's things we're familiar with, but they're used in a different way than we're typically seeing them. So one thing about Ken we know is he's Barbie's best friend. And they make this clear in the beginning, and he really suffers from not being able to be more than that. And it's not just in a romantic sense, it's just his whole identity hinges on being seen by Barbie and being active in her world. We don't have any sense, and neither does Ken, that when Barbie isn't interacting with him, he has any life whatsoever. Another trope that we see that's super popular, well, it's one of my favorite, I guess I should say. I don't know about super popular, but I'm so happy they use it in this movie, and it's twins. And that's the idea that there's so many other Kens, and there's so many other Barbies. And the other Barbies, as we find out, have identities. There are different jobs that they do. But the Kens are just Kens, and that provides really great conflict in terms of his jealousy, as we see in the beach scene, in the beach off scene, and going through the movie. But it's just a really great use of the twin trope to introduce jealousy and then this kind of competition for identities and for Barbie's favor. And then finally, the tortured hero, which is really what Ken turns out to be, and what really makes his journey what it is. But it's a great idea. It's a great trope just because her playing on this idea of Ken, who has no personality, as we know, as we're used to as a doll, having all this feeling and angst and tortured hero journey. So now that we've identified a few of the tropes, these are just a few of the tropes that are in the Barbie movie, I want to talk about how tropes actually drive the conflict even more, and we'll look at more tropes. So obviously, no surprise, we're going to talk about forced proximity. This movie does a great job of showing how forced proximity is used when you have the Barbie land and then the real world, and then the changes that happen in both of those places and how they interact. But what's great about the forced proximity is that the characters are forced to push against each other and have their conflict. There's nobody running away and hiding and a resolve of that. They have to keep bumping into each other until until things happen and change things. Another trope is unrequited love, and this is really how Ken has this. It's really Ken's unrequited love for Barbie. And that's what really is kind of pushing him to be seen in this movie. That's the kind of impetus to get him out there and try to figure out, oh, how can I be more than beach? So it's his unrequited love for Barbie, and it's a great use of that because it sends him on his identity journey in a different way than we would really think. And I really want to spend a few minutes talking about politics, because politics in this movie, there's been a lot of talk about the movie in terms of like gender politics, and that's fine, and that's great. There's tons of things that we can talk about with that. But there's also what I think makes this movie work is not just that. It breaks it down smaller, so first example we see is Barbie dancing with all the Barbies and saying, I'm having such a great time, and then saying, hey guys, have you ever thought about death? And then that just creates so much conflict, literally the story stops. And that's just like a beginning of how we see how politics are used in this story, because all of a sudden she feels different than everybody else and isolated, and she's starting to push back on what she knows because things are changing in her world. When we talk about Ken, we see a huge change with him where he shows up with Barbie in the real world, and then he starts to interpret things around him as, oh, this is a whole different world, a way of being. I can take what I see here back to Barbie Land and make it my own. So then there's his journey with his politics of how he interacts with the other Kens, how they interact with the other Barbies, and it's just a really great example of how that trope is used. She, like I was saying, this Greta Gerwig, the director, does this even deeper at like the micro levels, because you see the politics of the boardroom. Well, even before that, you see the politics of the intern who has to go and tell the boardroom with Will Ferrell that Barbie has escaped. And then you see the politics of that boardroom in terms of who, the hierarchy of who is who and how they interact and how they're going to deal with this problem. And so it's just, politics is really an important trope if you think about it's the continual pushing against different ideas or another way to do conflict in any kind of group setting. So you can put it in so much of your work. If you think of any time you have two people interacting, there's the politics of that situation. And like I say, I'm not talking about political parties. I'm talking about ideas and pushback and kind of things that are expectations that people have that are not the same. So it's really great. Like, I just think she did a terrific job in mining this, even going deep down, in all the levels of the movie in a way that you weren't expecting when you went to see a movie that's about a doll, ostensibly. And not surprisingly, as with Barbie, Ken's journey is really a use of the ugly duckling trope. And there's so many things that make this a fun trope to be used because, first of all, he's Ken, he's a doll, and his whole entire identity is to be good-looking and, kind of vacuous. And so his journey is also like Barbie's to find his identity. And he in this movie, in the setting of this movie, overshoots that. He goes from one extreme of having no identity to the other of having a very prototype chauvinistic male identity, to Barbie encouraging him to go and find his own identity and not just take on other people's identity. He doesn't have to just be a copy of what he sees. He can discover for himself who he is. So that's Ken's journey. He doesn't end the movie with an identity that's his own. He ends the movie with starting on a journey to discover who is Ken. So that's kind of a really neat, I think, twist of the ugly duckling trope, and certainly not one I would have ever seen or understood that really Ken was my favorite character in this movie, because he just brought so much conflict, so much humor, and so much heart in terms of trying to figure out who he is, trying to do the right thing. And I think that touches to a human emotion, which is why we connect with him and why his journey makes it so important to us. He's not just a doll. There's things about him that we can identify with, and that's what made this story have the heart that it did and not just be a story about two talking dolls and a bunch of other talking dolls. So I wanted to let you guys know that all 3 of my books are out, so if you want to talk more tropes, check these out. You can also check out my website, and there'll be talk there about what kind of presentations I'm doing, when I'll be doing more releases, and I'll put some more stuff on there about my tropes. So thanks for stopping by. Feel free to subscribe. I'm going to keep putting trope talk stuff up here because it's super fun for me to make these little presentations. I hope they're helpful, but let me know, leave a link or a comment in below, and I will talk to you soon, because there's always time to talk tropes. Take care.